Hey, we're never going to show up and the inbox is going to be at zero. We're never going to show up to work and nobody's having an issue. People are involved. Human beings are involved. Hey, I'm Russ.
And I'm Danny.
And this is the Memory Makers Podcast.
The show focused on helping you create amazing customer experiences and make more memories.
Memory Makers Podcast. I went medieval times on your Danny.
You did. And you're cursing quite early. This is that's got to be a record.
Well, yeah, I don't sorry about that, gang. Times are a little stressful. It's my coping mechanism, but hey, I wanted to tell you something. Last night when I was playing with Rinker, he said the phrase "gee willikers" when he was stressed out. And I knew that you just have such a good time with my, old man phrases and things, that to see then a 2.5-year-old go, "gee wilkers," when he was frustrated was ridiculous.
There's zero question of where he got that from, obviously.
No, it was one of those that Tiff looked at me and goes, and, just pointing at me with her eyebrows. So it's like, that's your kid.
Yeah, no.
Oh man, how are you doing?
I am great. I'm ready to get into today's topic, and I'm just in my mind imagining Rigger just going, "Gee willikers."
Yeah.
It's pretty great.
It's pretty great. Well, we'd mentioned my swear jar. I'm gonna have to put some coins in there, obviously, with this one, and joking about just times are stressful. But one of the things that we wanted to chat about today in the episode was how do you manage the stressful seasons, right? And what goes into actually making sustainable change, disrupting what's been done and forging new paths doesn't come without its toll, right? And there's just, when we're running businesses, we're dealing with customers, we're all of the things, there's those peaks and valleys of when we're really in the thick of it and really into the stress of it. And then, and how do we make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success and avoiding burnout and doing all of that? So as we get into this and kind of share some of the things that we've seen within Creative Works and other great tips and tricks that we've learned from some of our selected readings and things too, one of the first quotes that came to mind when we were talking about this, and Armando has a print of this up in his office, and it's something that we try to take really to heart, is life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it, from Charles R. Swindoll. And that for us, is just, hey, we're never going to show up and the inbox is going to be at zero. We're never going to show up to work and nobody's having an issue. People are involved. Human beings are involved. And so this is, we're going to show up, we're going to play that infinite game. Like, this is part of taking the swings at bat and making sure that we're getting after it from that perspective.
And it goes to show, if you've got employees, right, and there are two employees or maybe more than that go through the same experience at work, or the same kind of customer interaction, or whatever stressful thing it might be, and one can respond very well to it and the other one doesn't, it again shows that, well, the actual experience and what happened was the same, but the reaction was much different. And because of that difference in reaction, their stress levels may peak and they may become more anxious and more worried and all those different things. And I think it's really important to recognize how much of our life is impacted by our emotional state. And we have a lot of control over that, more than we like to give ourselves credit for sometimes.
Well, and it's not to make little of life happens, and life is not clean. It is messy and takes a lot of energy in all of the directions that it is. So when we talk about this control, what you can control, it's okay, well, what are tools that I can have in, arrows that I can have in the quiver to make sure that when these things show up, I'm not, just surprised by the fact that it's merely happening. And whether that's reframing, whether, any of these things where we can change our perspective, we can evaluate of, okay, if this is such a task, like what's a ripe opportunity for improvement around it, and just making sure that we get continually training our brains to focus on how solving the problem more than the problem existing is being such an emotional burden. And it takes time and it takes diligence, and it's not just, it's not light lifting. It's a habit that you have to create and kind of rewire the neural pathways to make sure that they're not going down the wrong rabbit hole.
And there's something else I like to think about when we have seasons that are busy or seasons that are stressful. There is a term that a lot of people will use of work-life balance. I'm not a fan of that phrase. I like to instead say balance is a lie.
Ooh.
And why I say that is because balance implies equality, right? When we say work-life balance, that means, well, I'm going to have an equal balance of work and then time with friends and time at home and time with family and time sleeping, and all these different things can't be equal. It's impossible. So the metaphor and the phrase that I like to use instead is instead of work-life balance, it's a rhythm,
Mm.
the rhythm of your work life. Because if we take this analogy, this metaphor using music, right? There are going to be times when the tempo and the rhythm of your life changes. There are going to be times when, hey, we're hitting the busy season at our facility, and we know we're going to have tons of groups and tons of birthday parties and tons of walk-in traffic and all those different things. I'm going to have to spend more time there. And we can understand that at different points in time, the rhythms will get faster and then they'll get slower. But
Mm.
as long as the different areas of our life, the different instruments in our life are working in tandem and on the same rhythm together, we can make that work. And understanding how all those things will flow, in certain seasons there will be maybe the rhythm's fast and then it slows down. But as long as all the instruments of your life are kind of at the same rhythm and working together, I think that is a really helpful way to think about it. Because the idea of work-life balance, if we have more work that we're doing in that particular season, we then feel this sense of, well, something's wrong, and it shouldn't be this way, and I need to fix this. And it's like, okay, well, let's recognize that this is a season, and there will be times when, yeah, you may work more than other times, and you may be on a sprint, and you may be doing some of these things. But as long as we recognize and have all the parts of our life working in rhythm and working in tandem, that's okay.
Well, and in leaning into that rhythm and being able to use the momentum, because sometimes having a lot on your plate, we don't sit still well. We like having that high operational tempo that comes with things, but it comes at a cost. And so you need to make sure that you're infusing into that rhythm the non-negotiable self-care items, right? Of what are we doing to make sure that we are having sustainable energy to and mental bandwidth to actually navigate these issues, right? Because we still need to be able to show up, and we still need to be able to put our best foot forward. So there are times, where if you don't have, if you start to you're not sleeping, you're not eating well, you're not giving yourself any, mental reprieve, that's going to make those stressful seasons all the more intense. And then you're going to have kind of these fractional mistakes that are splintering off of each other, just from the fact that, we are pushing the throttle too hard, or we're redlining it too hard. And one of the things that was really impactful, especially through the large growth periods that we've been going through over the last 5 years, is looking at what are some of those non-negotiable self-care items that I need to make sure that I have in the routine and that we're protecting first, because those are so important to make sure that I can then continue to show up at a 85% level, as opposed to just constantly running at a 65% level, right? Like, what are those things that are going to be in there? Some folks are big on, hey, I'm going to get up and I'm still going to maintain my morning workout, or I'm not going to default to eating, the stress eating the fast food, which I, guilty, because that's one of my go-tos. And you need to make sure that you are protecting some of those things, because you're looking at the long game of, yes, this is an intense moment. Yes, there's all this stuff to do. But if I'm, not brushing my teeth and flossing, so to speak, from you're not keeping up with the hygiene of your habits. I don't mean that in the literal sense. I just mean more of still making sure you're taking the time to do those little things that have such a big difference on your ability to show up. How do you expect yourself to be able to weather that storm of the busy season? And it's a zero-sum game at times, right? There's only so many minutes in the day, and there's only so much energy that we can expel. And so at times that's going to call for two things that we've learned from some of our readings. One, you've got Jocko Willink talking about discipline equals freedom in his Extreme Ownership book, as well as Dichotomy of Leadership books. Talks a lot about, if there are things that are just good basic maintenance elements, how do you consistently make sure that you're not compromising those, and that by taking the time to do those and not shortcutting those, what that actually then results in the freedom, because you're able to, handle those problems better and faster than you would if you were just sacrificing all of that stuff. And there's another talking point around it where it's, some of this is going to require some ruthless prioritization. And so you are going to have to, there are hard lines in the sand that need to be made, but it's one of those of, okay, well, if I know I can, I'm not getting much sleep anyway, and that's not really going to change with the sheer volume of work, but I'm not going to not only not get sleep, but then also cut back on, the exercise or the stress relief opportunities or other things like that. It just gets into a dangerous slope. And so, Danny, you always have this phrase of kind of a yes if mentality when it comes to that ruthless prioritization and being able to prioritize and execute what things are going to move the needle the most. And I always enjoy your insights on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people, and I've been very guilty of this through my professional career, of saying no because. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very analytical. I'm very process driven. And a lot of times if an idea comes up and I've experienced before, I know it's not going to work, I'll say, well, no, because. But the problem with that is it just immediately shuts down the person's idea or where they're going with it. And what I've learned, and I don't actually remember where this came from, but is the idea of saying, instead of saying no because, saying yes if. For those ideas that come up, whether it's for ourselves in our own lives or others that bring it to us, is saying, yes, that will work if X, Y, or Z.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a helpful way. It's the whole idea of improv, right?
Mm-hmm.
The yes and. It's kind
Mm-hmm.
of that way of being able to continue the momentum and letting someone own their idea still, but being able to bring some guardrails and factors into it that they may not be considering. So that's an interesting little sidebar there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And when we also look at just, personal self-care and what we're doing with that, and the whole goal is to prevent burnout, right? Like we want to make sure that we're maintaining the habits that are going to allow us to show up well, but that's not just for us, but it's for the team as well, right?
Yeah. So there's a lot of theories on what causes burnout, and I'm going to kind of share some ideas behind one of them. I don't know if there's one single answer that answers everything, but this is just a helpful framework to think about burnout. Burnout happens when there are two things that are occurring. Number one, that you or your team, let's think about your team for just a moment. Your team does not have a sense of control of what is happening at work. And then number two, they don't have a why behind the work that they're doing. So they can't control what they're doing at all, and they don't see a bigger vision of how it impacts anything. And so those two things combined, especially if you heap a lot of work on there, lead to burnout a lot faster. Yeah. Right. And so we've talked on this podcast before about the sense of autonomy. Sure, someone's going to have a role that they're going to be scheduled to do a certain type of shift, and that's the work they have to do. Well, we understand that there's not a lot of control. If you're going to be scheduled to be a laser tag marshal for the shift, that's your job. You don't just get to choose and say, well, I want to go do this other thing instead. But within that role, giving them the autonomy to be able to do their work and be able to shift their brief to the audience, whether it's little kids or maybe it's, adults or whatever it is, having some sense of control over what they do, or if a customer has an issue, giving them the autonomy and power to be able to resolve it instead of, I need to go find a manager. That sense of control helps. And letting them bring ideas to you of how to improve the business, how to improve the operations, and listening to those ideas help with that sense of control. And then the other part of that is the why and the vision, right? If you are a business owner or a business leader, you probably have a pretty clear vision and why for your business. You know where you're going, you know the purpose and why you want to go there. But oftentimes I see that business owners don't necessarily communicate that very well to their team. And so the team doesn't necessarily have an attachment to, well, how is me dealing with this customer right now going to make any difference in this business, or make any difference in my job, or make any difference in what I'm doing right now. But being able to tie all of the different roles to some greater vision and impact piece that they have is very important, so that they can have a sense of control and autonomy over what they're doing. And knowing that when we hit those kind of busy times and maybe some of those frustrating customer situations, being able to get through that because I have some sort of greater vision that's attached to that. So I think both of those things are important to consider.
Yeah.
And when we step back and we realize, okay, life is 10% what happens to us and 90% how we react to it. We think about the rhythms of our life instead of the balance between work and home life. We think about the self-care and knowing if we're going into a busier and more stressful season, how to take care of ourselves, and then how to give our team the sense of autonomy and vision to help prevent those burnout. I think all of that combined can help you and your team manage yourselves through those stressful times, through those stressful seasons and situations, so that you get to the other side a little bit stronger than you were before.
And so with all that, I think that's a wonderful place for us to wrap things up. Wouldn't you say, Danny?
I would say so.
Awesome. Well, we've got great content coming your guys' way, so be sure to check it out. And if there's anything that you want us to hit on as far as topics or things to explore, please send that our way.
If you liked what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review.
And always appreciate that 5 stars, please and thank you.
Like Russ mentioned, if you have any ideas for future episodes or topics, follow us on social media, send us a DM.
All right, and big shout out as always to Mikey Mike on the 1s and 2s, rocking in the Ultranet for us, and appreciate you all, and we will catch you on the next one. Memory Makers Podcast. So, be able to check out the link in the button below. One more time. Here we go. Awesome.
All right, bring the energy. I'm ready to roll. Let's do this thing.
Woo, 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 woo.